This is a Black Code introduction. It is a known fact that every race living in the United States today has a code of ethics that they live by, in addition to the laws mandated by our government. Every race except African Americans. For instance, when Asians migrate to America, they move to communities occupied by their people. Rarely will you find them living amongst the general population, unless they are married to people of other ethnicities. However, because blacks did not migrate to America, but were kidnapped and brought here as slaves, we, the offsprings of those slaves, have no sense of connection to one another and have failed to establish viable communities for ourselves. I also believe desegregation played a major role in that failure. Thus, today, we continue to live amongst other ethnicities who leech off our financial resources while looking down their noses at us with disdain. Many of these immigrants are baffled by our inability to produce commerce and wealth for ourselves, and I must admit, I am baffled as well. Why aren't blacks able to establish business, commerce, and wealth for themselves? It's a good question that I believe I have the answer to. It's our lack of trust and support for one another. It's that simple. For instance, when injustice occurs in a white community, everyone, and I do mean everyone, gets on code and appear to speak the same language. Rarely will you hear whites stating something different from other whites or from what you hear in mainstream media, which is predominantly ran by white people. But when blacks are faced with injustice, you get some stating one thing while others are saying another. Or you get a few blacks who protest publicly while the majority stays at home. It's this lack of support for one another that has caused a divide between our people and has prevented us from building real power and influence in America. This is especially true when it comes to business commerce. Today, blacks own less than 6% of all businesses in the U.S., yet we would rather shop at white businesses than one of our own. Why? Because 400 years ago, blacks were taught to be distrusting and envious of one another by their white slave owners. And that same distrusting mindset has been passed down from generation to generation, crippling the unity and support amongst our people. This sick mindset has prevented us from being competitive with other ethnicities and must be dismantled if we are to gain a greater footing in the business arena. Now, I surmise that in order for blacks to build a strong, cohesive power base, we need to solicit blacks who are ready to get on code and make things happen. That means we only solicit the top 10% of blacks living in America. Why only 10%? Well, I believe the mental capacity of most African Americans have become so corroded that they are incapable of comprehending why they're in the situation they're in today or how to get out of it. As I stated earlier, too many blacks have been brainwashed to care only for themselves. I've spoken to several different generations and noticed a distinct difference in the way blacks think about each other. For instance, the silent generation was born in 1946 and earlier. They lived during the civil rights era, and most of them lost their motivation to fight for equality when Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were murdered. I don't expect the 10% to come from this generation. Then we have the baby boomers, who were born between the years of 1946 through 1964. They tend to be pessimistic about the future and have a let's save the world complex. They are the most productive generation and tend to be hardworking and disciplined. I believe a large percentage of the 10% will come from this generation. Then there's Generation X, who were born between the years of 1965 through 1976. They tend to be self-absorbed and have a high sense of skepticism. And even though they are highly educated, many show little interest in daily social issues and tend to have a what's in it for me attitude. However, I believe a few 100,000 will come from this generation. The Millenniums. The Millenniums were born between 1977 through 1995 and tend to be self-expressive, confident, and less religious. They are less skeptical of the government and show great concern about the economy and environment. Millennials are tech savvy and may become the most educated of all generations. I believe a large percentage of the 10% will come from this generation. And lastly, there are the Sentinels, who were born between the years of 1996 through 2014. They tend to navigate towards simplicity and basic interests and are less judgmental than their elder generations. They are also more serious-minded than millennials and are self-reliant, goal-oriented, and eco-conscious. They too are highly educated and want to make a difference in the world. I believe several 100,000 will come from this generation. However, there is an underlying element in our race that has become toxic to the well-being of the majority. And like most poisons, it must be extracted to prevent it from destroying the entire group. For decades, I've watched a growing percentage of our people deteriorate beyond moral decency, and now that toxic behavior have trickled down to our youth who are murdering each other in the streets. I truly believe the only way to rid ourselves of this toxic element is to ostracize all blacks who exhibit violent behavior toward their own. And as crude as that may sound, I believe it is the only way to safeguard the Black Code movement. If the Black Code gets a positive response from YouTube and people want to start the movement, I will establish a website where the 10% can officially register. But I will only invest in the website if enough people show interest. 10% of 45 million African Americans is 4,500,000 blacks, which is more than enough to start the Black Code movement. Today, black need to get on code to show that we can provide for ourselves without the help of the government or other ethnicities. It's time that we stop depending on others to better our lives and start mimicking the methods they use to get what we want. And that requires us to get on code. However, this is not a call to start a protest group such as Black Lives Matter or Antifa. I have no desire to antagonize the police or our government. I believe it would be a waste of time, and many of Black Lives Matter supporters have been slain or imprisoned for their actions. That's why I am only soliciting the top 10% of blacks who can think outside the box, beyond old outdated guerrilla tactics, to develop new, innovative ways to inspire black liberation instead of public condemnation. We must learn to use our greatest assets, which are our intellect and strength in numbers, to enact the changes we desire. So with that said, let's introduce you to the Black Code. Number 1. Embrace your blackness. Number 2. Acknowledge your people. Number 3. Physically protect your people. Number 4. Vocally support your people. Number 5. Never kill your own people. Number 6. Obtain true knowledge and pass it on. Number 7. Support black empowerment and unity. Number 8. Support black relationships and marriages. Number 9. Support black businesses and entrepreneurship. And number 10. Never commit a crime. This concludes the Black Code introduction. Please subscribe to my channel if you are interested in joining the Black Code movement, and leave any comments or suggestions you might have. And thank you for supporting the All About Us channel.